Welcome. So please share your name, the office you're running for, and the boundaries of the district, if you will, and then a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you for having me in today. Sorry if I'm a little flustered. My truck broke down in the parking lot. I'm trying to get a tow, but I made it here. So my name is Jake Martin. I'm a Democrat running for Pima County Board of Supervisors in District 1. The southernmost boundary of the district is effectively River Road. And then it runs out, encompasses the whole town of Oro Valley, about half of Marana, and it runs all the way up to Pinal County. So it's quite a large district. It's the second largest district that we have, and it's the second most rural.
Thank you. And a little bit about yourself.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry about that. So my name is, I already said my name.
You're fine.
I'm a U of A student. I just finished my junior year, so I'm going into my senior year now. When I was 18 years old, I founded a nonprofit called Survivor Shield, and I've had the privilege of serving as the CEO of Survivor Shield for the past 2.5 years. We provide different emergency services to survivors of sexual and domestic violence. So we do like free therapy, free support groups, financial assistance, free clothes, shoes, hygiene products, that kind of stuff. We currently have a staff of 8, including myself. So
very good. And briefly describe your activity and experience in the local community and how that may be preparing you to potentially serve.
Yeah, absolutely. So within my job, of course, I founded a business. So even though it's a nonprofit, we're regulated by the same standards within Pima County and by the state of Arizona that most businesses are, minus a couple taxes that we don't have to pay. Mm-hmm. So that's really where my community involvement kind of began, working in the local business scene and working with primarily homeless and low-income individuals through my job. A lot of our services that we have at Survivor Shield are designed to cater to meet basic needs, whether that's childcare, housing, clothes, food, water, that kind of stuff. So the people that I work with, they're not in the best situations in their life. Oftentimes, like I said, they're homeless, they're extremely low income. Sometimes we work with homeless families. And they tell me a lot about what their experiences are in Pima County, what their experiences are, living on the streets, and what made them homeless in the first place. So one of the big things that got me into this race is realizing that we've had, I think, a 300% rise in overall homelessness since 2018. And that's according to the Tucson Pima collaboration to end homelessness. And realizing that, when you talk to people, when you understand what their situations are, you can better help them out of those situations. And one of the big problems that I see with the county government is that when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to rising crime, we're not talking to the people that we're trying to help. And when we don't talk to people, we write these really big, grand pieces of legislation that never actually trickle down to the people in need because they're not designed with those people in mind.
Okay, very good. Share with us your understanding of the statutory responsibilities assigned to County Board of Supervisor office.
So the County Board of Supervisors actually do quite a bit, given that it's kind of a lesser known office. So they govern water rights within the county. They're responsible for maintaining over 2,000 miles of road. The County Board of Supervisors, to an extent, regulates business. They regulate nonprofit operations, things like that. They maintain all county maintained parks. Of course, they don't yet maintain firearm laws, but there's actually a kind of a lawsuit kind of moving forward with that where Pima County is actually trying to get the power to regulate our own firearm control laws. So it's really, for a lot of people, the Pima County Board of Supervisors is their closest level of government, right? For those living within the city of Tucson, you have the city council. For those living within the town of Oro Valley, you have the town council. But for thousands and thousands of residents outside of those jurisdictions, the Pima County Board of Supervisors is their closest level of government, and they're their closest representatives.
Thank you. And you've touched on it, but public safety and issues around crime, homelessness, the fentanyl crisis are major concerns that we frequently hear from chamber members. Do you think the county is currently doing enough, or does the county need to be more involved in addressing these issues? And if they're not doing enough, what's your proposal? What would you get to work on?
Yeah, so Pima County is absolutely not doing enough. One of the things that they passed recently, I'm sure you're familiar with, is the Prosperity Initiative. Mm-hmm. And the Prosperity Initiative, as a social worker, as somebody who has actually written policy that pulled people out of poverty, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think that when we're writing legislation to address crime, to address poverty, to address the prosperity of our businesses, the legislation needs to be A plus B equals C. These are the steps that we're going to take to get there. These are the results that we want. This is the level of transparency we're going to have. These are the people who are held accountable if we don't make those results. That's not what the Prosperity Initiative is. It's 13 very vague points and goals. And the Board of Supervisors and our elected officials tell us that that's going to decrease homelessness, that it's going to decrease poverty, that it's going to decrease generational poverty. But how are we going to do it? It's a policy framework. It's not a set of policies. And Pima County's problem, which I touched on earlier, is that we're not really being concise enough. We're not being transparent enough, and we're not being accountable enough to results. Because when we see things like the Prosperity Initiative, we get excited about them because it's called the Prosperity Initiative, right? It's kind of given in this present with a pretty little bow on top. But the fact is, if we're not being transparent, if we're not holding people accountable to standards, then that legislation isn't actually going to do anything. And we see it time and time and time again in other municipalities and other jurisdictions. So in order to address crime, homelessness, public safety, my solutions would be very clear, very concise, very transparent. And one of those solutions that I want to propose is the establishment of the Pima Family Advocacy Center, which is essentially where we take all of our social services within Pima County, all who are interested, and we put them under one roof alongside healthcare and law enforcement agencies. And what that does is it eliminates the physical barriers to care for people in crisis. Now, when I'm out on the street and I'm talking to homeless people, one of the biggest reasons that I hear for them being homeless is that they fell through the cracks of the enormous cracks in our law enforcement, social service, and healthcare apparatus, right? How can we expect a mother of 6 to go to the hospital, to go to Sacasa's office, to go to a Section 8 housing office, to make it to DES, when we have a failing public transit system and when they're all on opposite sides of towns? And if she doesn't make her appointments on time, she doesn't get those services. What we need to do is centralize our services. And when we centralize our services, what we're doing is eliminating one of the largest paths to homelessness that we see. So if we want to tackle homelessness, the very first step needs to be the establishment of the Pima Family Advocacy Center. We eliminate one of the biggest pathways. Next, we focus on a rapid rehousing initiative where we work alongside our agencies that are already present and already have proven results to get people who are on the streets who want to be housed. Then we focus on job training, all that kind of stuff. But immediately establishing the Pima Family Advocacy Center and focusing on rapid rehousing initiatives.
Thank you. What do you perceive are the 3 biggest challenges and issues facing the business community? And if elected, how will you plan to partner with or include the business community?
So one of the biggest challenges is I actually have a friend who told me that I couldn't use his name because he's a Republican. But so he runs a barber shop in Midtown, and he told me it took him 3 months to get permits in order to replace windows because he wanted new, more energy efficient windows. And that is ridiculous. One of the first things that I want to work on is figure out why that's taking 3 months, figure out where the bureaucracy is, and cut it out of our governmental systems. And I'm not saying, we cut out environmental regulations. I'm not saying we go crazy with, health and safety regulations, but things like replacing windows, like building a shed. If your business has property, you want to build a shed, it shouldn't take months and months and months to get permits for that. So I'd like to cut regulations when it comes to permitting associated with business. I'd like to cut regulations when it comes to permitting associated with building new structures onto existing businesses. In addition, I think I would like to make it easier for our business owners in our community to have a say in what the Board of Supervisors does and in what the government does. Because as somebody who directs a nonprofit, of course we don't have owners, but the best that I can do to address legislation that I think would negatively impact my employees and my company is by having public speaking time at a Board of Supervisors meeting. And that isn't enough for our business owners. So we already have, I believe it's called the Small Business Advisory Council. Having a few representatives from a few businesses, it's not enough. I think we need to either expand the Small Business Advisory Council or look into steps that we can take to make it easier for business owners to comment on legislation that's being passed. Because when we pass legislation, it's affecting our employees, it's affecting a lot more, I think, than the Board of Supervisors recognizes, because a lot of them have never actually ran a business. Now, thirdly, I know that this is kind of tangentially related to expanding small business, but I really want to focus on expanding our public transit networks. Because by expanding public transit, by expanding bus lines, we're fostering economic opportunity for our small businesses by allowing people to reach parts of town that they haven't been to before, by allowing people to reach new employment opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily have. And in terms of making small business owners more active in policy, I think that was the answer to my second question, or my second point, effectively, is making it easier for business owners to tell the government when they're getting something right or when they're getting something wrong.
Very good. Thank you. You mentioned this already, but one of the questions is about the Prosperity Initiative. So what do you think are the three keys? And I think you touched on it, but maybe this can be an expansive question for you in creating prosperity in Pima County.
So I think the steps to creating prosperity in Pima County are, first, getting rid of those regulations that do nothing but harm small business. I think that that's really the first step that we need to take towards actual prosperity. Next, like I said, I think we need to establish the FAC to get rid of one of those huge pathways that we see to homelessness. And thirdly, I think we really need to evaluate the Prosperity Initiative. I don't think that it is an inherently bad piece of legislation, but reading over it, I know that it's not going to do what they want it to do, because it is a policy framework. So I think that we can revisit the Prosperity Initiative, we can look at what it's trying to do, and we can pass legislation, or we can make amendments to the Prosperity Initiative that outlines more specific things. Because the worst thing that we can have is the Prosperity Initiative being passed. We reform all of our budgets, and then it doesn't work. Who's accountable to the voters? Who's accountable to the taxpayers? Right now, nobody is. And to me, that isn't acceptable.
All right. And we hear from chamber members the importance of their workforce being able to access affordable childcare, transportation, housing, and more. Does the county play a role in meeting those needs, and how can public and private partnerships be leveraged?
Yes, the county absolutely plays a role. Actually, Pima County was one of the only counties where we have a free childcare program that's run through the county, and I think that it's a fantastic program. Right now, the Board of Supervisors are actually working on expanding that, which is fantastic. So yes, the Board of Supervisors absolutely plays a role in childcare, accessibility to kind of basic things like that, and then of course, expanding public transportation. And in terms of working with the private sector, we have over 3,000 nonprofits in Pima County, and we have 20 or 30 really, really big ones. But the thing is we have, I think, 10 or 15 nonprofits that are all doing different things to bridge that childcare gap. So by investing in our nonprofits and by investing in the agencies that already exist, maybe not, the top 20 or 30 largest ones like the county has in the past, we can work right alongside the private sector and the nonprofit sector to eliminate those gaps in childcare and expand our childcare program to more people who need it.
Very good. And you've flown through our questions, so we're going to open it up.
I hope I didn't go too fast.
No.
Thank you for being here. You mentioned several times expanding our transit system geographically. How do you feel about and giving access to people to have transit? How do you feel about the free transit system currently in the city?
So the free transit system, honestly, a mix. Because on one hand, I see the direct benefits, right? People who otherwise wouldn't be able to can get to our office for services. But then you speak to bus drivers, and they tell us that since we passed the free transit initiative, crimes have increased. Other negative things occurring on buses have increased, like drug usage, assaults on drivers. And that's obviously not something that we want to work towards. So when it comes to free transit, I think it's a very, very double-edged sword, and it's going to take a lot of work to get it right. I think that it should stay free, but I do think that there should be parameters on who it's free for. If you're using drugs on the bus, you can't ride the bus anymore. If you assault a driver, you can't ride the bus anymore. And right now, those regulations aren't in place.
Thank you. You mentioned that you'd like to remove regulation that harms small business, and I think harmful regulation is in the eye of the beholder. So Would you mind giving us a few examples of the kinds of regulations that you've seen pass through Pima County that you would oppose?
So zoning regulations in particular, I think, have a tendency to be problematic at best. I think that when we zone certain lots specifically for business or specifically for housing, especially in the downtown area, that can limit what our business owners can do. Because for a very, very long time, the model was your business is on the first floor, you live on the second. And with our zoning regulations, that's just not realistic anymore. So I think we need to rezone. We need to rezone our residential spaces so we can focus on building up instead of out, have kind of more multi-use zoning effectively. And then in that same vein, allowing businesses to build structures that they see fit within a certain parameter, right? We're not going to let people build an entire new building without any regulations, but within a certain parameter, like a storage shed, for example, replacing windows were the two examples that I used. So it really comes down to zoning being very, very stringent, and I think we need to look at changing those regulations.
Jake, you mentioned in your response to the questionnaire, you mentioned both the housing affordability issue, but then also, sustainable development practices. The two don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, but the practical reality is right now, on average, nationwide, 43% of the cost of building housing is nothing but government fees and regulations, almost half. The gray water harvesting stub out, that's another $800 per door. The EV charging ordinance, that's another $5,000 per door. If the current proposed building code amendments pass the way they are now, which ultimately will be up to the Board of Supervisors, that adds another $18,000 per door. So how would you as a supervisor balance housing affordability with sustainable development? I mean, I can build you a net zero house if money is no object, and money is an object for residents of Pima County.
Right. Money is absolutely an object, and it's a great question. So I think that it gets really complicated because I would love to sit up here and say, we're going to get rid of those charges, but we can't because we need to look at what they're funding, where that money is going within the government, and what we're actually using it for, because it's typically something that's pretty important, especially with the gray water reusage things in an area where we have such limited water resources. So what I would love to do is establish a committee of construction workers, of local business owners who work in the housing field, and then also bring some sustainability people on there, right? Some environmental scientists, and bring them together to figure out why those are so expensive, which ones we absolutely need, and which ones we can maybe put on the back burner for certain developments. And we can also make it a quid pro quo type thing, where if you have a sustainable house or a sustainable development, perhaps a multi-use zoning that's residential and business, you don't have to meet X, Y, and Z regulations. But if you're building something that is, in the classic style, no solar panels, carbon emissions, things like that, then you do have to meet those regulations in order to balance it out. So I don't have a perfect answer, but I would really like to bring together people who know and people who have experienced that before, because I'm not a construction worker, so I can't give a perfect answer. But there are people who absolutely can, and I'd like for them to have input on any type of legislation associated with that.
You talk about homelessness quite a bit in your platform. When you look at Housing First, do you think it's been a successful model? And if not, why? And also, where do you think, the number of people who may be coming here from out of the city and saying, hey, we're going to set up shop here, at some point it's a numbers game, right? You can only have so many new developments you can build, and if you have an infinite supply of people to fill those houses, you have a never-ending problem. So how do you take all of that and balance it out? I commend you for running. You're really young, and you're doing a commendable job of answering these questions. But this is food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the homelessness problem, especially in Arizona, and I think especially in the United States, where cities are so parsed out, the issue of new homeless people being attracted to a certain area because of certain policies, it's not as severe as people think it is. I've been working with homeless people for 2.5 years, and I've never met a single one of them who wasn't from Tucson. So I agree that it could become an issue. But I think when we're looking at the Housing First approach, I'm talking about, working with the Gospel Rescue Mission, working with agencies like that so we can get people beds. It's not necessarily going to be paradise. I'm not focused on building people their own apartments and things like that. We're focused on getting people beds. We're focused on getting them off the streets. So I think the way that the city of Tucson has been doing it is they build these apartment complexes, right? And then you have 16 units. And we have 2,200 people who are homeless right now in Pima County. So I agree, it seems like a never-ending problem. But when you look at potential other ways of doing that, which is we need to get these people beds, and we need to do it through the agencies that already exist, I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that we could start seriously chipping away at the homeless population that we have. And if that ends up attracting other homeless people, which I would be very surprised if it did, then that's a problem that we would deal with then. But right now, we need to focus on getting those 2,200 people off the streets.
Okay.
So as a small business owner myself, I'm going to ask a question in regards to funding these initiatives. How do you propose to do that?
Right. So the Board of Supervisors has said that the budget for their prosperity initiative or their reworkings will be about $300 million. Mm-hmm. So the Gospel Rescue Mission can house 50 new people every business week on a budget of $12 million per year. That's how we're going to fund it. Right now, the Board of Supervisors and Pima County in general and government substantially overspend what they need because they don't work with the private sector. They don't necessarily have those limitations. But when we work with the private sector, when we work with the nonprofit sector, there's accountability, there's transparency, and there's funding limitations. And as somebody who runs a nonprofit, I can tell you we're very, very used to working on limited funding. So imagine what we can do if we gave the Gospel Rescue Mission $12 million and we told them build X amount of beds and we're going to bring in this amount of homeless people, we're going to do this amount of programs. If they can house 50 people every business week, then imagine what we can do if we double their capacity for a fraction of what was already going to be invested into the Prosperity Initiative.
Sure. You mentioned in your in one of the questions that the county's biggest problems are accountability and transparency. Do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah. Can I stand up? I can't see you. Okay. Oh, I can't? Okay. I see you still.
I see you.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. Thank you for correcting me. So when it comes to accountability and transparency, this is such a consistent problem across government, is that we don't have people to hold accountable. When the government screws up, who do we blame? Because Board of Supervisors and politicians as it is, and our government employees have a tendency to spend our tax dollars without that accountability and without the transparency. So when they misuse it, when they don't get the results that they promised us, who's accountable? So what I want to do is make sure that when we pass policy, especially social policy that's designed to address homelessness, like if we can't house an extra 50 business people per week through the Gospel Rescue Mission, why? Where did that money go? And I think that there needs to be a transparency clause in every piece of legislation, right? How many politicians have told us they're going to fix our roads? Have our roads been fixed? Absolutely not. That's why I don't talk about roads. So I hope that answered your question. I really want to focus on inserting transparency and accountability clauses into every piece of legislation, because if I let my taxpayers down, if I let my constituents down, then I absolutely should be held accountable on the polls.
When it comes to the unhoused and everything you're talking about, if somebody's using drugs, right, you've seen plenty of different models of how this works, but if somebody says, I want to keep using my fentanyl and my whatever it is, right, what do you think should be done with them at that point if they're still out on the street?
So one of the worst things that we can do is make them stay on the street. Everybody who I've met, literally everybody who is addicted to fentanyl, and it's been a lot, got addicted once they were on the streets, not beforehand. Drug addiction doesn't lead to homelessness. Homelessness leads to drug addiction. So the worst thing that we can do for them is leave them out on the streets where they're going to be continually exposed to that crime, continuously exposed to those drugs. So do I think that we need to pull them off the streets and put them in with everybody else? No. But I do think we need to have detox programs, and I absolutely don't think we need to turn people away because they are addicts, because we're just going to put them into the cycle, and they're going to overdose, and the county's going to end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on medical bills. Thank you.
Just a quick comment, and a thank you for connecting expanded transit to economic development and workforce. I sometimes feel like I'm screaming into the ether about it. And I think that seeing a face like yours shows how future-facing those initiatives are.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big point for me.
And with that, you used all but 10 seconds. So, Jake, congratulations.
Okay, thank you, everybody, so much.
And I'll just say